What happens when you realize you're queer because of Franciscan University?
And what if your classmates start casually suggesting we bring back Catholic monarchy?
This week on Whiplash, we talk with Evelyn Lundy about deconstructing faith, coming out, and escaping fundamentalism, with a few wild turns along the way.
Plus, I put on my history hat for a little Pride Month queer Catholic throwback. You're not going to want to miss this one.
Welcome to Whiplash with Maxwell Kuzma,
The show where two queer Catholics, Max and Emma, dive into the dark and twisty Catholic faith we were handed.
and the beautiful mess we're building in its place.
It's a journey of exploration, excavation, and deconstruction.
As we challenge the limited view of God we were taught,
An embrace of fully affirming, expansive Catholic faith.
no topic is off limits and no question is too big or too small.
We're in this together, figuring out how to reconcile our queerness with our Catholicism, and maybe, just maybe, even reimagine them both.
So buckle up, folks. You might experience a little whiplash, but we're here for the ride.
Let's go!
Welcome back to Whiplash, where we talk about what happens when faith and identity collide. I'm Max.
And I'm Emma. Today we're joined by Evelyn Lundy, co-host of Leave, Laugh, Love, a podcast about leaving behind fundamentalist Catholicism and finding freedom on the other side.
Evelyn shares her journey from Catholic school to Franciscan University, from youth ministry to queer awakening, and how that all led to deconstruction and healing.
And since it's Pride Month, I'll be putting on my history hat to walk us through some of the queer history many of us never learned in church.
Whether you're deep in the church, long gone, or somewhere in between, this one's for you. So today, we are so excited to welcome to the podcast Evelyn Lundy. She is a co-host of the podcast Leave, Laugh, Love, which is, a great play on the millennial Live, Laugh, Love. And that is about deconstructing Catholic experience and ultimately leaving the church from fundamentalist experiences. We both actually went to Franciscan University of Steubenville, to which the crowd all goes, "Oh."
Yep.
And you can also find her for more of this that content on TikTok at The Life of Ev. So Evelyn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me here. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Yeah, and to kick off, we would love if you could just give us a little bit of an overview, kind of a zoomed out picture of kind of that Catholic upbringing and kind of what led you to where you are now.
Yeah, so I grew up, it's so funny because I grew up very nominally Catholic, very Christmas, Easter Catholic, all of that. But I went to Catholic school because it was the private school. And I don't know, I got pretty into it there, but then bigger picture, we moved to Texas, and the church we started going to, I had youth ministers from Franciscan, got really into Life Teen, mission trips, church retreats, all of it. And that's where I really, really got into it. And then my parents were kind of what is happening? So I went to Franciscan, which also pissed my family off because I had really good grades, really good SAT scores, and I picked a school with a 97% acceptance rate. Oh, also, when I was in high school, I started doing Catholic social media.
Oh, yeah.
Some people know me from the Sunflower Catholic era. So I was doing the catechetics and youth ministry program. Then I started taking classes. I was like, wait, this is actually insane. Because I thought I was really into it, for my parish in Texas. And then I got to Franciscan and I was like, oh, because my freshman year was the year that Pope Francis said that thing about how maybe gay people shouldn't go to prison. And then everyone lost their minds. And my professor was talking about how the moral law should reflect the civil law, the civil law should reflect the moral law. And I'm just over here so does that mean you want to put straight people who have sex before marriage in prison too? And he's just like, yeah, actually. And I was like, hello.
Oh.
Um,
Yeah. Did you know any Catholic monarchists when you were at Franciscan? Because I knew one.
I did know a couple Catholic monarchists. I think it mainly came out when I was in Austria. Did you ever do Austria?
I did.
Yes. So when I took the Austria culture class, we were talking about like the government, and then people were like mad that my professor, who was insanely very deeply fundamentalist Catholic, was just like kind of okay with the way the government in Austria was run now, which like leans a little more socialist. And then they were like, but what about monarchy? What if we return to monarchy? And I was just like, okay, cool.
I'm always like, did they realize that in this, beautiful, magical, wonderful realm of Catholic monarchy, do they realize they're going to be like the peasants? Like they're not going to get to,
right.
They don't get to be fancy. They don't get to be super dressed up. They don't get to wear the crown in this story.
Yeah, no, you guys are going to be the peasants. Sorry, besties. The going to Franciscan really started to put the chips in all of that. Just with the continually crazy things that were said over and over time, started to just kind of put some cracks in it. And then I was also starting to come to terms with being queer as a freshman in college, which is wild that Franciscan was actually like the first gay representation I'd seen in my life, but I did grow up in Texas. So I had a couple friends who were like queer, but like following church teaching, all of that. And through conversations with them, I was like, you mean like it's not normal? Like straight girls don't want to like kiss their best friend and just like choose not to, so that was actually so funny that Franciscan is how I realized I was queer. But so I was like kind of wrestling with church teaching on that, and ultimately had to deconstruct it, like take a step back from the church, and then kind of got like, I always never know the words to say. It wasn't like kicked out, but it was kind of like nicely suggested to leave Franciscan. And then I moved to California with my girlfriend, and we're good.
The gay promised land.
The gay promised land. Love to see it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I think that's a really good foundation to kind of set the stage, because one of the reasons that I'm excited about this conversation and in talking about Pride Month and some of the history too is, as people who grew up in Catholic environments, we didn't always get the information. Right. Not just like, what are terms? Like, I can't even tell you when I first even learned about bisexuality, but I remember like I kind of knew what being gay was, and then I was like, oh, there's also bisexual. Like there's all these things that I didn't even know. And so I think all of us, having come from kind of the more fundamentalist, more, I guess, sheltered maybe is a word too that we could use. At least for me, I could speak for myself. So I'm excited to dig into the history part. So just a note for the listeners. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have Emma, our resident historian, put on that history hat and take us through some of the history of Pride. And then once we do that, we'll dig into some of the themes that pop out to us, some of the Catholic responses that we've seen or experienced. And then we'll close with talking about why Pride is now more important than ever. So Emma, let's turn it over to you.
I'm so excited. So Evelyn, actually thinking through Los Angeles and the West Coast is a really good place to start this conversation, because back in 1950, one of the earliest LGBTQ plus organizations, the Mattachine Society, was founded as a secret organization in Los Angeles. But as queer and trans people at the time, as do many of us today, called out the organization and its publication, titled One, was pointedly white, male, and cis. So other organizations did exist, like the Daughters of Bilitis, specifically by and for trans women. But this was founded in 1955, but it really wasn't until the Stonewall riots in 1969, led by trans women, by sex workers, by other lesbians, that the modern LGBTQ plus movement got its start. So when we think about Stonewall, yes, when we think about the Stonewall riots, what we're actually thinking about is one piece of the 6-day protest. So it was in the early morning hours of June 28th, 1969, that police had raided the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar that was located in Greenwich Village in New York City. The raid sparked a series of spontaneous protests and riots by LGBTQ plus patrons and local residents of the neighborhood. And this action was pointedly led by trans women, lesbians, and sex workers, which I like to note and be very pointedly about, since often in discussions of queer and trans identity within especially American and Western systems, it's a pointed representation that's white, cis, and gay and male. So with that being said, actors like Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, who herself had a wonderfully vibrant faith, Stormy De La Verrier, Tommy Lanigan Schmidt, Zazu Nova, and many others put their bodies on the line for queer liberation. These events, fueled by years of discrimination and police harassment, are considered to be a turning point in the LGBTQ plus rights movement. But it's important, as some of the work that I do centers on remembering that they weren't the first ones. So queer and trans people have existed for as long as humans have. And in fact, one of the first gay rights protests actually happened here in Washington, D.C., where I'm based. It was actually just its 60th anniversary reenacted this past April 7th. It was a protest with 10 people out in front of the White House on April 17th, 1969, where people were protesting their right to work in the federal government and have equal access to employment. Another critical protest occurred in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco, called the Compton's Cafeteria Riot, which was a response again against police harassment and violence towards trans women. It occurred in August 1966, so again, before that pivotal Stonewall riots, 3 years prior to that. And in DC, as well as in other groups across the country, faith remained a key point to this conversation that I know we'll talk about a little bit later. So as I mentioned earlier, the Mattachine Society of Washington, so specific to the DC area, coordinated a conference of clergy people from Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish communities to convene and discuss what faith meant to the LGBTQ plus community. At the same time, they founded the Washington Area Council on Religion and the Homosexual before the Stonewall riot. And back in 1960, again, 10 years after the founding of the Mattachine Society and 9 years before the Stonewall riots, the publication One was even thinking through what it meant for queer people, including queer ordained people, to navigate their identity in their own churches. So it brings us to the first Pride marches. So the first Pride March was actually known as the Christopher Street March, or the Christopher Street Liberation Day. It was held on June 28th, 1970, to commemorate the first anniversary of the Stonewall riots. And it began in Greenwich Village and ended in Central Park. In fact, for people who are interested in listening, there's currently an exhibition going on at the Hispanic Society in New York City titled Out of the Closets into the Streets, New York City's Pride March 1975 to 1976. It's an exhibition featuring 20 photographs taken by Francisco Alvarado Juarez of some of these first Christopher Street marches in the 1970s. The exhibition will run through August 31st. The Christopher Street marches were followed by additional ones across the country in Los Angeles, Chicago, San Francisco that mobilized local communities and were a way to bring people together and collect and leverage resources that communities had for their own survival. So to what we know now today is that while the first marches were a direct response to an anniversary on Stonewall, it took several decades for Pride Month to be officially recognized. It wasn't until 1999 when President Bill Clinton declared June Gay and Lesbian Pride Month. And as we know most recently, the state of California officially recognized August as Transgender History Month and LGBTQ plus History Month in October, that we have what we consider a modern construction of Pride Month. Subsequent presidents, including Barack Obama and Joe Biden, have issued declarations recognizing June as LGBTQ plus Pride Month, and months celebrating LGBTQ plus communities have expanded throughout the year, including specific holidays, which we recognize throughout, and many of you probably know. So Trans Day of Visibility on March 31st, Queer Youth of Faith Day on June 30th coming up, National Coming Out Day on October 11th, Intersex Awareness Day on October 26th, and many, many more that many of you have likely celebrated or encountered tangentially through your own communities. But why this history is so important to recognize is that now under the current Trump administration that's been consistently removing references to trans people at the Stonewall National Memorial, and especially more recently, NPS staff removing Trans in Progress pride flags from the Christopher Street Park across from the Stonewall National Memorial, is that many of these histories are actively being erased. It's only through understanding our historical ancestry and legacies that we can truly leverage what histories and what progress we've made to fight for where we are and hold ground, but at the same time push forward in that way. So as happened with Juneteenth, there is a campaign of erasure, but also to erasure through silence within the Trump administration that we here on this podcast today, as well as many other groups, are hoping to fight by just talking about and recognizing the histories that come before us. And as I mentioned before, people like Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson were deeply religious. So as we talk about the intersections of queerness and Catholicism and any form of faith, we have to recognize that some of the leaders that put their bodies on the line for liberation and fought police violence were also people who drew a lot of their strength from spiritual networks of meaning. So that's a little bit more of the history that I was really excited to share, but you all know I could go on forever.
Absolutely. I think that was a fantastic overview. I have two questions, one that I have for you, Emma, that I'd like to start with, and then one for Evelyn. So the question I have for you, Emma, is, can you unpack for us a little bit more about why this is important to you specifically, like what it means to you? And then when you're done, I'm going to ask Evelyn to share a little bit about her like awareness and understanding of LGBTQ issues when she was young, and then kind of fast forward to now, because I've seen those pictures of her attending Pride on Instagram.
100%. I'd be happy to. So for me, I would say that it's twofold. As someone who works in history, who my everyday job is a collections and museum specialist, every day is working, touching, interacting with objects that contain and preserve these histories, preserve a sense of ancestry and belonging in knowing that we have a history and a legacy. I consider the work that I do with the Queer and Catholic Oral History Project, with recognizing and sharing these histories, a form of sacredness, a sacred form of work. I shared about it in our Queer Catholic Joy series earlier this month, but I think it's important from a professional and personal standpoint that these histories are preserved. So part of what the first aspect is that this is central to the work that I do every day, both my livelihood, but also my survival as a person. And then I would say the second point really builds on that idea of survival, is that as somebody who grew up in a community where queer representation was still kind of confined to ideas of white, gay, cis men, and ideas that often perpetuated harmful stereotypes that were really devastating for many people in the community. I didn't even know that queer women existed, just like you say, Evelyn. So knowing that not only I'm not the first of all, that I'm not someone who's broken in my concepts of gender or sexuality, that I continue in a path of people who are queer, but also that there is a vibrant community that has come before me that has helped shape ideas of what gender and sexuality look like, but also how my inherent dignity is tied to my expression as a queer woman is incredibly vital. So thinking through histories of not only the Daughters of Bilitis, but also the Furies based here in Washington, D.C., radical lesbian feminist groups, specifically ones that are trans inclusive, because knowing our histories means being knowledgeable and transparent about histories that are difficult to grapple with. So especially a lot of radical feminist and radical lesbian feminist communities have deep-rooted histories of transphobia. So not only is this a way for me to recognize my own histories and that I continue in a long legacy, but also that I have to hold myself and my communities accountable to histories of abuse that continue within the LGBTQ plus community against the very people who fought for our rights today.
100%.
I just love how much you know about everything. Yeah, as far as representation, I distinctly remember the first time I even heard the word gay. I was in third grade, and some kid on the bus turned around and was like, "Have you seen the clown at Walmart that only hides from gay people?" And I was like, "No." And he was like, "You're gay." And he thought it was a really funny joke. I just didn't even know what gay meant. So I was like, okay. And I go home and I'm like, "Mom, what is gay?" And she's like, "We send you to Catholic school." Like, and I got no answer. So that was, and my mom is lovely and great now. But I think she was just like, what's happening with my third grader that I sent to Catholic school, I guess. She also had like no exposure. But yeah, I knew no openly queer people pretty much all of growing up. I eventually, when we moved to Texas, I did go to a fairly large public school. And I knew like one non-binary person there, who was just like fully treated as barely a person by a lot of like teachers and classmates. Like, yeah, I had no representation. My representation actually was Manny Gonzalez, who is from my home parish, which is, yeah, a cis white man. No hate to him on that front. Like, obviously that's his experience, but I really did not know queer women basically existed at all. Actually, oh my God, I watched Atypical towards the end of when I was in high school. I don't know if you guys have seen that show. There's like a brief lesbian side plot. And I was like, this is making me feel some kind of way. I need to never watch this again. But even then, it wasn't like conscious. It was still very like below the surface. So yeah, there was genuinely no representation until I met like closeted queer people at Bible college, which is so wild.
And Manny Gonzalez, isn't he also, in answering this, you will teach me and our listeners, isn't he also somebody who is kind of like in the ex-gay category?
Not ex-gay. He is very I don't know. What he does is important within the church, I think, on some level. Like, I have a complicated relationship with his ministry now. But he's very anti like conversion therapy. He's very like vocal about like the fact like that he's not gonna like stop being gay just because he's Catholic, but he is still, I always mix up side A and side B and which one is which. But he is of the side of like traditional sexual ethic, quote unquote. Yeah, celibacy. So
okay. Yeah, I think that's an important note too, is that because I resonate with, I didn't know Manny, but having examples of like, if I did see examples of queer people, it was gonna be that they are like, well, we are gay or whatever, or maybe we're just same-sex attraction. We don't even use the word gay. But we're going to stick to church teaching. And so like, that was difficult too for me growing up, because it was like, well, one of my only examples is somebody who can only your only role if you are gonna embrace a LGBTQ identity is like you have to be this martyr, and it's like
Yes.
it's so amazing that you're doing this suffering and but like that's the only role you ever get to have.
Pretty much, yeah. Which I think I just had a very complicated relationship with, even as I was doing like Catholic influencing and like some
Yeah.
smaller level like speaking things and whatever. As I was coming to terms with being queer, I think it was really complicated on a lot of levels because especially I think just the way women's sexuality is talked about within the church. This is something I always like to touch on because it's almost like when I would hear gay men who were talking about being like celibate within the church or whatever, when they're talking about like realizing that they were gay, they realized it like immediately, like as small children for the most part. Like those were the testimonies because like the church acknowledges that men have attraction. And so when that was like absent towards women, or when men were not experiencing, that was just like clear to them. But as women, we were just like not supposed to even experience attraction.
Yeah.
So when I wasn't really feeling that towards men, I just thought I was like better than everyone. I don't know.
No, 100%. And I do want to tie in what you're saying, Evelyn, I think is really important. There was, and I didn't know if it would come up in this episode, but there was one of the people that I follow, she's a sex educator she runs the course Purity Culture Dropout for like queer people that were raised in really high control religious environments and fundamentalism. And Erica had reposted a social commentary from the activist and speaker Rachel Klinger-Cain. And Cain had posted that Pride Month seems like a great time to discuss how Christian purity culture keeps women-loving women ignorant of their queerness.
Yeah.
Christian culture teaches that women aren't sexually driven. We are told that lust isn't an issue for women, and any sexual education we do focuses on sex as a female duty. It's a message of female asexuality. So when queer women don't experience attraction to men, they assume that disinterest is what every straight woman experiences instead of a sign that they may be queer, unquote. So I feel like that's really important here with the idea. It was something I experienced as well within purity culture, that there was an expectation that women just wouldn't experience sexual attraction or that any discussion of women's bodies was inherently pornographic or sexual. So even like aims for me to understand my body or to have conversations about what bodily autonomy or control of my reproductive choices looked like. I've shared this with Max before, but the idea that even in the early 2000s, taking birth control pills for like severe PCOS and basically having members of my family, members of the parish saying, we're not going to talk about that here. You're not the only one, but we're going to put on the like veneer that is not something that's acceptable or accessible to anyone in these spaces. So I think what you're saying is incredibly important in that purity culture comes for all of us, including queer women, perhaps especially queer women.
100%. I think that's very interesting. I eventually, and now what is her name? Avera, I was like briefly familiar with, and I don't know where she's at now. But she was like kind of just the female Manny Gonzalez equivalent as far as my understanding at the time. And then more recently, I think Kim Zember, and even then the discussion of attraction that they portray felt so toned down from the celibate gay Catholic men who are like, oh yeah, like, you know, it's just like they can say that, but even queer women within the church. Avera Maria Santo. Yes, that one.
And also,
go ahead, Max.
Oh, I just looked her up, and there's a book now that she's written that's on Amazon. Like, that was the first thing that came up. It's called Experience Me, Letters to a Young Catholic Living with Same-Sex Attractions. Avera Maria Santo thought she might be gay as a 16-year-old high school student and was scared to death of her attractions. Growing up Catholic, she didn't know much about homosexuality and didn't even hear the word until high school. Even then, the only people who would speak openly about it were people who lived the gay lifestyle. I'm sorry, I just
So
these
it's like
types
the
of people.
opposite thing of representation that we were just talking about.
And Evelyn, I also want to point out that I think part of this construction comes from the idea that women are not inherently sexual also perpetuates the idea that women in cloistered and professed communities are not queer. So the idea that like there are a number of lesbian, bi, pan, queer women that exist within these communities have for centuries because they provide an element of respite and refuge. Not to say that homosexuality and LGBTQ plus identity and relationships were not seriously and violently punished within these communities where they existed, but to say it's the idea that until recently, until like the second half of the 20th century, there wasn't even discussions about what that looked like or that it could exist. Even today, it's not mostly considered.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. I do not love to think about that, but I have found that interesting in like reference to the saint. You probably know everything. You know all the details.
We do not. We definitely don't.
But the saint who like cut her breasts off to avoid being like married, or the one who like shaved her head to avoid being married, I'm like, it's giving. She just so deeply did not want to marry a man.
Saint Agatha.
But then people are like, oh, she just was so pure and she just wanted to be a nun. And I'm like, okay.
Evelyn. And I think what you talk about is important because there was a really interesting piece. Let me pull it up. It was written in U.S. Catholic by Julia Fetter, and it's titled Reclaiming the Virgin Martyrs from Purity Culture. And it draws on this idea. It's the idea of like heroic young women in the early church for whom like virginity like was very today is constructed as an idea and like inherent to this sainthood when at that time, as you say, there is an element of having sexual autonomy over the body, especially when marriage was kind of compulsory. It was either marriage or this professed ordained life. So I think that's really, really interesting in the same way that thinking through, especially for St. Joan of Arc, someone who has become a real important icon for queer people, how like a key part of her testimony and her trial was like the checking and verification of her virginity and how that virginity was connected to her spirituality and her ability to be kind of this element of a prophetess or saint on behalf of the church. I'm curious, what did you experience? Did you experience purity culture growing up within Catholicism?
I definitely experienced it within Catholicism. Yeah, I mean, so many layers. When I was in 4th grade and we got like separated up into our little Catholic school like talks, my takeaway was basically no actual useful information, and just that if someone was trying to sexually assault me, I should let them stab me instead. Re Maria Goretti. But I still didn't know what sex was. Even in Texas public school, it's an abstinence-only state. All I was getting was just, if you have sex with anyone, you're going to have 50 STDs and get pregnant and die. So, like, I just, yeah, there was a lot of layers, I think, within the church, but also just like societally. And I was on birth control actually for 4 years while I was in high school for hormonal reasons. And similar to what you were saying, Emma, it was like such a thing. And like when we go on church retreats, you have to like give your medication to the like leader who's distributing it. And then it was just always so awkward. It was always this whole like you have to justify yourself that this is not because you're having sex. It's just because health reasons, whatever. So yeah, so many layers of just like, we do not talk about this.
Yeah. I think it's so important. And I know we're a little bit
we're not directly talking about Pride Month, but I think what you say, Evelyn, was incredibly important, and I'm glad it's part of this conversation, because I think as we say more than any other year, there's been discussion about how like queer phobia is an essential piece of purity culture, and in deconstructing this element of queer phobia in the church, there also has to be a reckoning about what women's sexualities and the ways in which women's lives and bodies are understood as their own, but also understood as something that contains inherent dignity and is not the property of someone else's.
And I also see a connection to pride, though, because pride is about, in one way of expressing, or like one aspect of pride is about like being able to take up the space as who you are. So like not immediately shutting down or like casting rumors or like all the stuff that is happening, like, oh, like even just the idea that you are taking birth control, that's scandalous. Like pride is like kind of the opposite, where it's like, you know what? No, like I am going to take up space. I am going to wear a rainbow Speedo, and like I am going to like be visibly here, and like it's none of your business anyway what I'm doing in my house. Like this is me getting to be who I am. So I am curious, Evelyn, like your experiences maybe with pride, like, because I just want to say for myself that like I think for even when I was like reckoning with my own identity, I was definitely scared of pride for a while, because I feel like definitely Catholics, if they're suspicious of birth control for any reason or like things like that, then pride is something that they're very suspicious about, you know.
100%. I think I can't put a finger on when I learned about pride, because it's not like it was anything I ever saw. Definitely, I would say all through high school, I don't think I had a concept. I actually brought my little sister to orientation like right after I had graduated high school. She was about to start. And this one teacher had like, everyone is welcome here, like rainbow thing. And I was like, scary liberal. But I think it's just like, it's so interesting now in having conversations with people who are born and raised here in Los Angeles, like my partner was, about the fact that like it's not people are like homophobic. I've heard people say so many times, like being homophobic, being queerphobic, like it's not a phobia, it's just hatred. And it's like, on some level, yes, but also when you are raised with no exposure, it is actually genuinely scary. Like it is like this threat. And oh my gosh, I have this quote here that I read in this article when I was deconstructing. And it's so funny because I was just going back through my pictures last night and I just saved this, not even in relation to this conversation, but I think it's important. Here it is. It's from the Catholic News Agency, which I don't know. I know there's lots of different reputations around different Catholic publications. So I don't actually really know where they fall on the spectrum. And I wish I knew what this article was called, but I don't, because it's just a screenshot. But it said, oh, and this was actually about Franciscan when they almost lost their accreditation, I believe, for social work because of that one class where they like equated homosexuality with rape and murder. It was like the deviant behavior class.
Franciscan.
Love it. So it's about this. And then there's this quote that's in the article. It says, if you live in that sort of intellectual isolation where gay people are hidden, it's easy to wander down that path where gay people are rapists and murderers. That scary other. So 100%. It's like, yeah, if you've never put a face to a queer person ever, if you've never like had a relationship with a queer person, it's easy for that caricature of them, I think, to become the image you have of them. So yeah, I was very scared of pride. I was very scared of all of that. I think oddly, being at Franciscan and having friends who were also queer, but like abiding by church teaching was a really useful stepping stone for me, in that it was a more accessible way for me to kind of break down some of my conceptions. And then I had a friend from high school, a very close friend from high school, who I kind of had that signature like homoerotic lesbian best friendship with.
That you look back on like,
Yeah.
Evelyn, we've all been there.
We've all been there. And she was like, I'm dating a girl now. And I was like, what? But then I was like happy for her. And I was like, this is a weird thing for me to like work through. So I think those were all like helpful, like incremental steps. And then eventually when I was like kind of on the tipping point of being on the verge of leaving the church, I was kind of trying to seek out like queer spaces. They don't exist very near Franciscan that I could find on the internet.
That's a good song. I feel like that's so true.
So then I was just like kind of like on the internet, like, what can I go to? And it was like drag brunch. I was like, scary. And then, yeah. So I did eventually go to my first Pride in Pittsburgh while I still lived in Steubenville the summer before my last semester at Franciscan. And it was super fun. It was super great. It was just like this really weird experience because I was dating my partner Katie at the time. Like we had pretty much just started dating, and we went, and it was just like so weird in the sense of like when we were going anywhere in Steubenville or even in like the surrounding area of Steubenville, like you go to Robinson, you still see Frannies. You just like live in this like surveillance state where you never can actually feel like fully comfortable. You never can go on a date and like actually just go on a date. Like you're just always going to be terrified that someone's going to see something because it takes one person taking one picture at one party and you're done. Which I had seen happen to a different gay couple when I was at Franciscan. They thought they were like safe at an off-campus party with a lot of people they knew, and a picture got to administration. So going to Pride was this really interesting moment of like, oh my gosh, like this is actually a place where no Frannies are going to be. I hope, unless they're protesting, I guess.
The protesting. I forgot like Frannies were just so big on like protesting everything.
Everything. They were protesting. You were definitely out of Franciscan by this point, but briefly at one point in time, I don't remember which pharmacy it was. It was either CVS or Walgreens. One of them started selling the morning after pill, which is so mild of them. And like they literally like stood outside with signs for like months.
I've been thinking about how, like, so often in these high control Catholic groups, it's like, it's not even so much defined by like positive things that they believe, but really by the things that they're like protesting or the things that they're against.
Mm-hmm. The experience of Pride was so interesting because it was such a like safe. I always say I have like this little Catholic apologist sitting on my shoulder still. Like instead of the devil and the angel. So I was gonna say like safe space, and then I just can hear everyone being like safe spaces for snowflakes. But it was just like a genuinely like I finally felt like I could like my nervous system could like take a breath for like 30 seconds. And then me and Katie got outed on a Franciscan meme page. So that was fine. That was fun. But yeah, that was my experience with Pride.
I appreciate you all sharing this because it was the same of I didn't go to Franciscan University. So I'm glad that you both are able to share your experiences. It's strange because I went to school at a college in university in East Central Indiana. So in Mike Pence's district, where like on campus, there was some queer representation. And I think I found like a group that really supported and welcomed me. But even in like the on-campus parish, there was a lot of continued like homophobic conversations that happened at that time. It was a similar experience in that there was a sense of patrolling and surveillance that I think connects to what you're saying a lot, especially in that I was really lucky. I had a professor at my university, at Ball State University, when I attended there, who created kind of a reading group for many like LGBTQ plus people who were kind of grappling with what faith meant and what it would mean to stay or to go. So we read, I believe it's Elizabeth Johnson's She Who Is, a feminist liberation theology text, and kind of applied it through the lens of queer liberation theology. But it was funny because I was a cantor all throughout college at my university's church. And so I would like bring She Who Is like in my backpack, after we would have the reading groups and sessions, and after we would like in between things when I was going to practice, or sometimes when I was going to mass on that Sunday. And it felt very much like a double agent in that sense of wanting to be protective of my identity and kind of balancing this double life in many ways. But I think what you're saying is incredibly important, is this idea that for so many people, this is a real risk. And this fear, I think, surrounds just not knowing or not having ever, as they believe, meeting like a queer or trans person, when in actuality, they very much have. But in the same sense, it's this fear of the unknown that I think is really difficult. And I'm as speaking with previously with Max, as well as with another friend, about the upcoming Jubilee this year, the LGBTQ plus pilgrimage to the Jubilee doors and going through that ritual and ceremony. I think people are hopeful that it'll be a space for just everyday Catholics to meet like LGBTQ plus Catholics, and to know that these are members of your very families. These are members of your parishes, of your communities, people that you surround yourselves with every day and give meaning, and help your churches to exist and continue operating. So as Max has said before, if you take out the queer people in the church, the choir, but also many other parts of the congregation would be very, very quiet.
Yeah.
The best place moving forward that I think, as you say, Evelyn, is this idea of unknown, but also unknown for people that are LGBTQ plus and grow up in this Catholic space. One thing that Max and I wanted to talk about is this Catholic sense, as you mentioned, that anything LGBTQ plus is bad or off limits, or the idea that the two things cannot coexist. So very much as you brought up before, I was speaking to this person that was on side A or B, was specifically this theology of I am gay, but I'm staying within the bounds of kind of the sexual ethic and morality of the church of being completely celibate. As you say, is very much reinforcing the idea that you can't live your authentic life. You can't validate or affirm who you are or what relationships that you want. So I think it's really important to discuss that further. Evelyn, this has been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you all. That's honestly what I wanted to affirm too, is as Max and I, my one last thing to say, as Max and I have said before, there's a lot of rhetoric online about Catholics and Christians trying to kind of take back Pride Month. There's been rhetoric kind of equating the LGBTQ plus community with being demonic, with being satanic, which is false. Again, like, queer people exist, queer people of faith exist, Satanists exist. In any sense of religious liberty, we have to recognize and acknowledge that traditions are going to be different, but they're also going to be valid and need to be respected. But in the same sense, I think about a lot of Catholics and Christians have kind of, in many of the same way of trying to like pull back the rainbow from LGBTQ plus identity, have tried to pull back June as the month of the Sacred Heart. And I think my last take in that conversation would be to say that it's not so much a competition in trying to own these spaces. And Max earlier had shared a really beautiful flag of kind of the Sacred Heart on like a background with the rainbow colors, and thinking through what that means and how both can coexist together. And it doesn't have to be an either or, but also respecting people's space. There are people, just as you've said, Evelyn, that have been deeply, deeply hurt by the church, giving them space and time and balance to hold their own and also maintain their boundaries with the church and people who have hurt them, while at the same time, like creating spaces of welcome and inclusion and knowing that those two things can coexist, not only in people, but in institutions.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's so much to say about that. I just don't why can't we have both? Just so many people don't understand how they can coexist. And I think that definitely used to be a thing that existed for me. Like, I did not comprehend how they could coexist. And I still definitely have like a complicated relationship with it. I definitely don't consider myself Catholic anymore, but I do consider myself very like Catholic adjacent, because that's always going to influence my spirituality.
Yeah.
Like, it was the language through which I developed a connection with spirituality.
Exactly.
So it's always going to impact it, regardless of whether I go to mass on Sunday or not. A little point for the people in my DMs who are always telling me I can't actually be ex-Catholic because I have indelible marks on my soul. I didn't understand how it could coexist for so long, but also, like, I think it's just a testament to the way that the American Catholic Church stakes so much of itself in these culture war issues of abortion and LGBTQ plus issues, because why is that the defining thing? Why is that the like you're in or you're out mark? Why are we defining it by that and not Catholic social teaching? Why can someone be a straight married man who like exploits his employees and doesn't pay them a living wage, and no one cares about what the catechism says about that? So yeah, why is that the hill they're going to die on? 100%. I think it is really interesting. It's very telling of what their definition of being a person of faith really is. Is it why is it based on these culture war issues and not just an actual relationship with God? You would think that would be the marker of someone who is or isn't a Catholic.
I would love to like kind of come to the end by talking about, like, for you, maybe the fulfillment, the flourishing, what you kind of came to when you allowed yourself to embrace your identity, and when you kind of like set forth on a life where that was going to be part of your life and no longer this scary closeted thing, but how you moved into where you are today, like the peace and the happiness.
It was such a journey of like, it's this crazy, scary, unknown thing. And then one day I hold hands with a girl and the world doesn't explode. And then, I started dating my girlfriend and like fire didn't rain down from the sky. And yes, like my life did blow up in a lot of ways that are more related to the way people within the church responded to that than anything else. And I think there was a period of things being really complicated, just like logistically, around how am I going to exit. And that's also where it just starts to feel culty. It's like, oh, I have to like strategically unentwine myself from this system, like untangle myself from this system that has actually taken over every facet of my life. Sorry, this is not the positive part you're asking for, but I was just, I always like to validate the fact that it actually does kind of suck at first. Like,
no, totally.
Because it's not just like you flip the switch and things are great. But there were like these little moments of peace that were very reassuring to me while simultaneously my life was crumbling. And I'm not trying to say this in any kind of way of you should just move to LA. I literally just moved here because my partner was born and raised here. Like, people think I moved here just like for the gay promised land. We just are down the street from Katie's parents. But I think just getting out of that environment, like after I moved, then I was finally able to be like, whoa, like, okay, it is okay. No one cares. That's the other thing. No one in normal people land cares. This is the importance of queer community, and this is the importance of queer representation, is that over time, as people are more and more familiar and more aware, it just becomes not a big deal. Like, it went from being something that was such a big deal, such a like point of everything I had to like grapple with and wrestle with when I was living in the context of like Franciscan, the Catholic Church, Steubenville, to literally the least interesting thing about me to anyone in Los Angeles, California. Like, okay, you're dating a woman, next. Like, so is everyone.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, I think this is a hugely important point because you were saying about like not wanting to be too negative at first, but I experienced like the exact same thing where it was like,
yeah,
because like, you know, you talked about having your work, your social
yeah.
media presence was super Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
My work was too, and because I was taught that everyone in my life needed to be a Catholic,
Yes.
unless I was evangelizing them. And, you know, that's like everybody else. And that's like supposed to be this constant thing you're doing all the time, but also like the way you live your life and being so intimately involved in Catholicism is supposed to somehow like represent to people. It's a very complicated thing. But
Yeah.
my point is that, realizing that actually, yes, there are other people and I can have relationships with people. And I
Yeah.
don't mean just like romantic relationships. I mean, like, I can be friends with all this variety of different types of
100%.
people and the world is not going to explode. Like, I can
Yes.
trust people who are not Catholic. I didn't even
Yes.
think I was like allowed to trust people who weren't Catholic for many years. Because I was always told if you move to a new place and you need a car mechanic, they have to be a Catholic as well. So I think that's a very valid and important part of it is like, and that's also honestly a beautiful thing about a pride parade. It's a beautiful thing about Pride Month.
Yeah.
It's, hey, look, let's go out and meet some of these people who are part of our community. Like, I mean, I'm not going to go so far as to say Jesus would be at a pride parade, but I mean, he probably would. Like he was not the type of person who was like, all right, I've got my people. These are the only people. Like, I've got my 12
Right.
disciples. We're just going to go and we're going to hide and we're just going to talk about our stuff all the time. No, he was actually out there meeting people. So I just wanted
Yeah.
to connect with you on that part because I feel that.
Next, I was also going to say, from my conceptualization, it wouldn't be that he would necessarily be leading the parade, because I, in my hope and my conceptualization, it would be this person that would put their body between people that would trying to be enact violence against this community and the people that he's trying to defend. I think more than anything, the ways that I experience divinity and sacredness and holy forgiveness is the people here in DC who are part of the DC Peace Team, who are part of the Parasol Patrol, who like basically at like drag queen readings hold up parasols, like put themselves in between these groups of people and the people that they're trying to hurt.
Yeah.
So that's how I imagine it, and that's how I always conceptualize where he'd be.
100%. And as we draw to a close here, I am really happy with like the vast variety of things that we've covered, because truly Pride Month this year has felt so intense and so many things have happened.
Yeah.
We're kind of at war now.
Yeah.
So it's just been super wild, but I just wanted to like leave an open floor for any final statements.
I think just, to touch on what you were saying, like I went into this Pride Month like so excited. I don't know why I thought it was going to be a great one under the Trump administration, but I went to into this Pride Month like so excited because last summer was my first summer living in California, and I was genuinely just like recovering. So I didn't even get into it that much. And this year I was like, I'm going to be so into it. And then I also had like a video series planned of like 30 days of my little gay life on TikTok. And I got like halfway through that. And then I was like, literally the ice raids are happening like in my neighborhood. And this just feels really out of touch right now. But I think that despite all of the insanity that is going on this month, as much as I would love and kind of on some level need for Pride to be this super, super joyful like celebration of how far we've come, it does bring it back to its roots of that Pride is ultimately a protest. And I think it's been helpful to kind of reconnect me to that on that level. The work is not done as much as I would love for it to be. And there's still a lot for all of us to do. And that's why having conversations like this is important.
100%.
And I think the thing just to bring us home is that, Evelyn, it has been so lovely having you here, speaking about your experiences, sharing these vulnerable moments with us, sharing and highlighting how purity culture affects queer women specifically, about the radical histories of Pride Month, about conceptualizing what it means to kind of destigmatize and humanize LGBTQ plus people from extremely conservative Catholic spaces. This has been an incredibly important conversation about what Pride Month means to people. Especially when we come to this time where either far-right groups are trying to co-opt Pride, including the iconic heterosexual Pride that had 50 people there this past month, but also people that don't think Pride should exist, that all of the work is done and we don't need to have this work anymore, that we're okay just to move forward with what we have and make peace with that. I think understanding that today is understanding that the fight for pride and the fight for queer and trans liberation is an intersectional one. We cannot fight for pride without fighting for immigrant communities, for our neighbors that are facing systemic violence, for people that are facing systemic police brutality today. So we can't have or celebrate or understand pride without thinking about other systems of disenfranchisement and violence that are committed again today. And that includes for queer and trans people just like us. So thinking through to this, we wish everyone who is listening both a happy and joyously protesting month of Pride, but also a month where you can learn to say yes and both can coexist. Not only for queer and Catholic, but also for thinking through how the fight for our rights and liberation are directly paired to the rights for people that are immigrants in this country, but also the rights for people who are currently suffering under different tyrannical reigns throughout the world. People who are suffering because of losses of healthcare, people who are suffering because of bans on gender-affirming care and reproductive justice. All of these fights are intertwined, and we're only going to fight them with more months like Pride Month.
As we wrap up, we're holding a lot. Grief, humor, memory, and hope. Pride Month can bring all of that up, especially for those of us who came from rigid or fundamentalist spaces.
Yeah, and conversations like this remind us that deconstruction isn't just about what we leave behind, it's about what we make room for joy, honesty, and the freedom to live as our full selves.
So whether you're deep in the church, long gone, or somewhere in between, we hope this gave you something to hold on to.
Thanks for being here with us. We'll see you next time on Whiplash.
Goodbye!